We bought a house for $300,000. Laughing, my mother-in-law said so. I was stunned into silence by her words. Beside her, my father-in-law also seemed filled with joy. It was just after a month of memorial service for my son, Stefan, who had passed away. Watching my in-laws, I felt they only thought of themselves. And the bank book in my mother-in-law's hand was undoubtedly Stefan's. Thinking about the significant amount of money in that bank book, I couldn't help but laugh. Too bad, huh? Hearing the words I blurted out, my in-laws looked at me in surprise. They probably expected me to be furious, but I was imagining them being the ones enraged. I hesitated a bit about revealing the truth right away, but decided to watch a bit longer. I, Claire Thomas, turned 42 this year. I work part-time. After finishing my morning shift at the supermarket, I return home to do household chores. Currently, I live with my husband, Stefan. Unfortunately, we couldn't have children. We discussed it a lot and cherished our time together as a couple. We met when Stefan visited my previous company for business. As a receptionist, I saw him often, which led to dinners and movies and gradually deepening our relationship. After Stefan's proposal, we dated for about 3 years before getting married. Our greetings to each other's parents went surprisingly smooth. Especially with mine, as they seemed eager for me to get married. When Stefan came to greet them, they immediately asked him to marry me. I was surprised by my parents' eagerness for marriage. But Stefan said earnestly, "I will do my utmost. Please entrust your daughter to me." Surprised by this exchange, I was left speechless. The atmosphere was amicable, and we completed our greetings. Next was greeting Stefan's parents, but that was unexpectedly difficult. Though they accepted the marriage, my mother-in-law scrutinized me harshly. She checked my every move, and I was too nervous to speak much. Stefan tried to help by talking a lot, but his mother's scrutiny and his father's intense gaze continued. After the greetings were over and I arrived back home, I was completely exhausted. However, they had given their approval for our marriage. I believed that once the marriage registration was completed, Stefan and I could enjoy a peaceful newlywed life together. But, my in-laws frequently visited our home, even though they didn't live nearby. It seemed like they hadn't accepted our marriage, coming every weekend and inspecting our house while Stefan was at work. I became a housewife and had to prepare for their visits. I cleaned thoroughly the day before and cooked meals my mother-in-law would enjoy. It was hard enough with just her visits, but my father-in-law always accompanied her. They seemed to check if I was supporting Stefan properly. My mother-in-law strictly judged my role as a wife, while my father-in-law observed from a husband's perspective. He rarely intervened, but she relentlessly criticized everything. They not only checked how I cleaned and folded the laundry, but even scrutinized the seasonings I had bought, pointing out anything they deemed missing. Do we really need this check every week? I wondered, feeling distressed as each weekend approached. It was becoming unbearably painful. Moreover, my in-laws kept bringing up the fact that Stefan and I had no children. Do you understand? A wife's role isn't just about doing household chores every day. You should comfort your husband when he returns tired from work. And bearing children is also an important duty. Failing in this makes you a disgrace as a wife. After rummaging through the house and complaining, she would always say this before leaving. My father-in-law, listening to this, would always nod in agreement. It seemed they were not satisfied unless they had something to complain about. After leaving these words behind, my mother-in-law would always slam the door loudly and leave. Once the door closed, I would sigh, listening to their fading footsteps. I protested this weekly ordeal once after getting married. However, my objections fell on deaf ears, and I was harshly scolded instead. Since then, I stopped protesting directly and instead asked Stefan to talk to them. Upon learning the facts, Stefan apologized with concern and immediately called his parents to protest. After that, the visits from my in-laws stopped. But my relief was short-lived. Instead of weekly visits, they started calling almost daily. Knowing I worked part-time in the morning, my mother-in-law often called in the afternoon. These calls were always lengthy, and she rarely hung up quickly. The content was trivial: her outings with friends, meals, neighborhood gossip, and complaints about my father-in-law. Occasionally, I received calls from my father-in-law too, with content so disturbing I prefer not to detail it here. These daily calls from my in-laws cut into the time I needed for shopping and household chores. I could prevent shortages by shopping after work, but the calls significantly reduced my time for meal preparation. As a result, the long calls from my in-laws made it difficult to prepare dinner before Stefan returned home at dusk. I used to always have a warm meal ready when Stefan returned tired from work. But now, no matter how hard I try, there just isn't enough time. Stefan laughs it off, saying he doesn't mind, and regularly cautions his parents about their behavior. However, this results in a negative loop where I end up receiving more scolding from my mother-in-law. What's wrong with parents worrying about their children? Why would you say such things? It must be Claire instigating Stefan to say these things. Put him on the phone right now. Every time Stefan spoke up against his parents, my mother-in-law would react angrily. Because of this situation, it's difficult to stop my in-laws' behavior. Unlike before, they're not backing down, and it's a constant worry for Stefan and me. One day, as I returned home, my mother-in-law called as usual. "Claire, listen. My husband is trying to spend all his retirement money. What do you think about that?" Today's conversation seemed to start with complaints about my father-in-law. I sighed quietly, out of earshot, as I listened to my mother-in-law's words. But then, I heard something unbelievable. "Compared to that, Claire, you're doing well. Stefan is making a lot of money from stocks, right? It's great that you've got insurance on Stefan. You'll be secure no matter what happens." Excuse me. Indeed, Stefan was trading stocks and had built up considerable assets. But I was puzzled about how my mother-in-law knew this. We had never discussed our insurance with my in-laws. Stefan started stock trading due to his concerns about America's current situation and future uncertainties. He had accumulated significant assets this year. We kept this a secret, fearing trouble if my in-laws found out. But my mother-in-law seemed to have gotten the information somehow. "Mother, how do you know about this?" I couldn't help but ask forcefully. Then, my mother-in-law replied with a mocking laugh. "When we visited your house last time, my husband found it. Of course, we didn't search on purpose. We just happened to see it while looking around the room. It was an accident, so forgive us, okay?" From her tone, I could tell she was smirking on the other end of the phone. I couldn't help but retort to my mother-in-law's words. "Wait a minute. Even if you are Stefan's parents, do you really think it's okay to be so disrespectful?" To which, my mother-in-law calmly replied, "Well, worrying about our son is a parent's duty, isn't it? Is it really so wrong? Besides, if there are assets, we won't have to worry about our old age. Truly, Stefan is a wonderful son. It's all thanks to how I raised him." My mother-in-law seemed delighted by her own words. I was so shocked by her response that I couldn't say anything. When Stefan came home from work that day and I told him about this, he held his head in dismay. "You've got to be kidding? They knew about it?" "That was our asset for the future." Stefan looked as bewildered as I was. We then spent every night discussing ways to prevent my in-laws from finding out more about our assets. During this time, I received news that Stefan had collapsed at work. I had just returned from shopping that day and was occupied with a call from my mother-in-law, as usual. I was hoping the call would end soon when my phone rang. "Excuse me, I have a call coming in." "Oh, who's calling at this time of day?" "You shouldn't answer unknown numbers. But let me tell you about what I was discussing with the neighbor yesterday." My mother-in-law kept talking nonchalantly. I missed the chance to end the call and glanced at my phone, only to see the screen had gone dark. However, it started ringing again. It was the same number, so I knew it was the same person. Despite not recognizing the number, I used it as an excuse to end the lengthy call with my mother-in-law. Rushing to answer the ongoing call, I learned it was from Stefan's company. They informed me that Stefan had been rushed to the hospital. I hurried to the hospital, only to find that Stefan had passed away there. The cause was cancer. Stefan had not been to the hospital before, and it seemed the cancer had advanced significantly. His colleagues said that Stefan was always concerned about me suffering from my in-laws and tried to return home early. Deep in sorrow, I somehow managed to arrange his funeral. On the other hand, my in-laws didn't seem very saddened by their son's death. Instead, they appeared restless and agitated. Despite my curiosity about my in-laws' behavior, I was too occupied with responsibly finishing the funeral. After a month of memorial service, my in-laws visited our house. Despite not attending the service, they came over, and I reluctantly let them in. As soon as they entered, they didn't pay respects to Stefan but started talking excitedly, as if I was about to hear some bragging. "We bought a house for $300,000. Laughing, my mother-in-law said this, and I was stunned into silence. Beside her, my father-in-law also seemed filled with joy. It was just after a month of memorial service for Stefan. Watching my in-laws, I felt they only thought of themselves. And the bank book in my mother-in-law's hand was undoubtedly Stefan's. Thinking about the significant amount of money in that bank book, I couldn't help but laugh. My in-laws looked at me in surprise, probably expecting me to be furious. But I was imagining them being the ones enraged. I had my eye on this house for a while, and since Stefan passed away, I thought we'd buy it with the insurance money. I secretly took the bank book during the funeral, and went straight to the contract afterward. I'm so glad we made it in time." "Too bad, huh?" I replied sarcastically. Hearing the words I blurted out, my in-laws looked at me in surprise. They probably expected me to be angry, but instead, I was imagining them being the ones enraged. I hesitated a bit about revealing the truth right away but decided to watch a bit longer. I understood the current situation of my in-laws, thanks to everything my mother-in-law had just told me. And I could easily imagine the trouble that was about to befall them. There was one action I had to take now, but even I hesitated a bit. True, my in-laws were unpleasant to me, but they were irreplaceable parents to Stefan. For a moment, I thought about forgiving them for Stefan's sake, but remembering their past actions, I couldn't let it go. Apologizing to Stefan in my heart, I decided on my retaliation and began preparing. Mother, father. Taking the bank book without permission is a crime. When I said this, my in-laws quickly retorted. "What are you talking about? Didn't I just tell you?" This bank book wasn't stolen, it was given to us by our son. Yes, that's right. Stefan, knowing his own limited time, gave it to us as a token of his gratitude. Their current statements clearly contradicted what they had said earlier, but I decided to let it slide for the moment. However, I couldn't afford to listen to my in-laws' story for too long. They fundamentally misunderstood the situation. So, I quickly made my move. But you know, the insurance money won't be deposited into that account. Don't be ridiculous. It's an account under our son's name. Why wouldn't the money come in? That's strange. My in-laws were more confused than I expected. Indeed, they had Stefan's bank book, but they didn't understand that it was currently unusable. Unless I processed it, Stefan's account would remain frozen. A deceased person's account is suspended, and complex procedures are required to withdraw from it. And I am the beneficiary of the insurance. So it was never going to be deposited into Stefan's account in the first place. When I calmly explained this to my in-laws, their faces turned ashen. They had crafted a cunning plan but were utterly unaware of basic societal rules. And the insurance money has already been deposited into my account. So, you won't be getting a penny. When I made this clear, my in-laws reacted with a face like they had swallowed a bitter bug. What are you talking about? Stefan must have left a considerable inheritance. You don't have to be so stingy. Indeed, I had inherited all of Stefan's $13 million in assets. But that was the original agreement. And after my in-laws found out, Stefan had asked me to absolutely not give his parents a penny. Looking back, Stefan might have been aware of his health condition at that time. Thinking about it, the words he said to me, considering me, became even more heart-wrenching. There must be enough inheritance to spare, right? What's wrong with forgiving just $300,000? Father-in-law tried to persuade me, but I firmly refused. It should be common knowledge, but I decided to reiterate. That money belongs to Stefan. I can't give permission on my own. Upon hearing my words, my mother-in-law made an unbelievable statement. What are you talking about? Stefan is no longer here. So you can give permission in his place, can't you? Shocked by her words and unable to hold back my anger any longer, I yelled at my in-laws. I will never do such a thing. My angry voice momentarily froze my in-laws, but they weren't the type to back down easily. My father-in-law quickly composed himself and tried to persuade me again. Then, what about the payment for the house? How should I know? Isn't that the result of your own unreasonable actions? We're family, why are you so cold? But no matter what they said, my heart didn't budge an inch. Family, huh? Do my in-laws even have the right to use that word? Ever since Stefan and I got married, I never felt an ounce of familial warmth from them. Their attitude towards me had been cold from the time we announced our marriage. Yet, I believed that one day they would open their hearts to me. However, that hope was utterly betrayed. And they even showed disdain towards their own son, Stefan. Seeing how my in-laws acted, I decided to stop bothering them. No matter how much I tried, it was futile. Family, huh? Have you ever behaved in a way that made me feel like part of your family? I expressed my feelings frankly. It seemed that unless I was this direct, my words would not reach my in-laws. However, they ignored what I said and continued with their self-serving arguments. What kind of way is that to talk? We've taken care of you in various ways. Are you aware that your care was nothing but a nuisance? How dare you speak to your husband's parents like that? Who was the one being disrespectful all this time? I had reached my limit of patience. I don't want to hear about disrespect from you two who stole the bank book during your son's funeral and didn't even show up for a month of memorial service. Despite my counterarguments, my in-laws were unfazed. You married into the family, it's natural to take care of your in-laws. Respect your elders. The extent of their desire for Stefan's money. It was infuriating. From your actions up to now, there was nothing to respect, was there? My tone might have been harsh, but honestly, I didn't feel much guilt. I wanted to scream at them that Stefan's collapse was their fault. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law, oblivious to my feelings, revealed another unbelievable fact. Yes. Remember, we gave you some pocket money before. It was from selling things we didn't need from your house, but still, we gave you money. See, we've been taking care of you. Hearing this, a past event suddenly made sense. When my in-laws were still visiting our house every week, my mother-in-law unexpectedly gave me some money as pocket money. I thought it was out of kindness back then, but I never imagined there was such a story behind it. Around the same time, Stefan was upset about his cherished camera that went missing. I had no idea it had been sold off. I was utterly shocked that she referred to this as giving me pocket money. So that's why Stefan's treasured camera suddenly disappeared. Stefan was busy, and he didn't have time for such a camera. She might have thought her reasoning sounded plausible, but to me, it was just a poor excuse. They didn't understand the gravity of their actions. Mother, that's actually a serious crime. It's theft. When I said this, my mother-in-law sighed in exasperation. Theft. You're just trying to make us out to be criminals. How troublesome. She shrugged her shoulders as if I was the one being unreasonable. Seeing her, my hands trembled with anger. Even in this situation, they acted as if they had done nothing wrong. How much more did they intend to frustrate me? Because you are criminals. I had to refrain from getting emotional here. It was important to handle this calmly. I don't understand that at all. Despite her resistance, I continued to respond in a measured way. No matter how much they tried to justify themselves, the facts wouldn't change. To break the stalemate with my in-laws, I let out a deep sigh and decided to make a decisive move. Then, let's leave the judgment to someone else. That way, it will be clear who is right. In my words, my in-laws looked at each other in surprise. Someone else. Who would you have judged this matter? Clearly, they had no understanding of their situation. I looked at my in-laws and let out an exaggerated sigh, then explained their options one by one. Which would you prefer? A lawyer, or perhaps the police? You can decide, Mother. At this, my in-laws' faces turned pale, and they began to panic. What are you talking about? The police. There's no evidence. We didn't do anything wrong. Even my mother-in-law, realizing the gravity of the situation, frantically tried to find a way out. But I was already prepared. Have you heard of smartphones? Nowadays, there's this handy app for recording conversations. Very convenient, isn't it? I said this and revealed the smartphone I had been hiding, showing it to my in-laws. They were shocked, their faces draining of color. Wait. That's eavesdropping. She screamed loudly, but unfortunately for her, my action wasn't eavesdropping. The conversation about them stealing the bank book, selling Stefan's camera, everything was recorded on my phone. This is eavesdropping? Well, then, perhaps we should have the police decide on that too. Even if I argued that it wasn't eavesdropping, my in-laws would never admit it. That's why, from the start, creating a situation where they would listen to me seemed like the best course of action. I began preparing to leave the house. At that moment, my mother-in-law addressed me. "You. Aren't you ashamed to do this to your son?" I paused for a moment at her question. Of course, I felt guilty towards Stefan, but when I decided to retaliate against my in-laws, that emotion didn't change my resolve. "Mother, I return those words to you," I responded, staring coldly at her. Even my mother-in-law seemed shaken. "We were only thinking of your best interests." Her feeble attempts at justification were too late. I cut her off. "Is that so? Your consideration led to buying a house with the bank book you stole right after Stefan died, and planning to pay for it with his insurance money? Enough. That's just hindsight." Despite my calm demeanor, she still argued back. But I firmly stated, "No. What you did was intentional criminal behavior." Finally, my mother-in-law seemed to make up her mind. Whether out of realization or desperation, I had been waiting for this moment. "Fine. If you want to paint us as criminals, let's go to the police right now and prove our innocence," she shouted defiantly, pulling a reluctant father-in-law along with her to the police station with me. At the station, I briefly explained the situation to the reception. Deeming it a complicated case, the officer guided my in-laws and me to separate rooms. I detailed everything from the events since our marriage to that day, and played the recorded conversation as evidence. Even though I could hear my in-laws' voices from the next room, I remained undistracted and calmly explained the situation. As a result, my in-laws were indeed suspected of theft. Although further detailed questioning was conducted, it took quite some time due to my in-laws' non-cooperation. During that time, I filed a complaint and secured time to contact a lawyer. That day, I managed to return home, but my in-laws, having hurled insults at the police officers, were arrested for obstructing public duties, becoming bona fide criminals. Now they had a criminal record. But I wasn't kind enough to let it end there. I was determined to pursue every avenue available to me. I consulted with my lawyer and decided to demand compensation from my in-laws for the mental anguish I had suffered and for the money they had made from selling items from my house. As a result, my in-laws were overwhelmed with the payments they owed me. My mother-in-law was a homemaker, and my father-in-law had retired, having some pension funds. But they had to use that money to pay my compensation. They also had to pay a penalty for canceling the house they had impulsively bought. Now in their old age, my in-laws had to work to pay for their actions. They are earning money by juggling several part-time jobs. The whole incident became known to their neighbors. Despite the cold stares from those around them, they continue to live quietly in their old house, unable to move due to the payments they owe. As for me, I started a new life using the assets I inherited from Stefan. I moved out of the apartment and bought a new condominium. I live my days paying respects to Stefan's altar. While the sorrow of losing Stefan never fades, I started selling handmade crafts to distract myself. Surprisingly, they became popular, keeping me busy. This led to meeting many new people and making friends with other artists in the neighborhood. We sometimes enjoy coffee together, discussing new ideas for my crafts and sharing everyday concerns. Unfortunately, I couldn't retrieve Stefan's beloved camera, as I wasn't knowledgeable enough. Yet, spending time in the spacious living room of my condominium, looking at the photos he took, is special to me. Of course, I sometimes think how happy it would have been to live here with him. Looking at photos of my smiling face taken by Stefan, I'm reminded of the importance of staying happy. It will take more time to recover from my grief, but time will gradually heal these wounds. Freed from my in-laws' issues, I've decided to slowly enjoy my life moving forward.